As they say in hockey, let's do that hockey.
Play a full 60 minutes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep it simple.
Get pucks deep, putting the puck deep, put pucks in deep. We got to keep it simple and just get pucks going forward.
Getting into the forecheck.
We got to keep playing aggressive.
Trying to take away their time and space.
We're focused on tonight. We just got to stick to our game.
Hockey is back, baby. The preseason is underway. We're 1 week from the opening puck drop, and the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast is back for episode 11. A slim crew, but this could be a breaking point tonight. Just me and Matt Leonardo. I'm Casey Ditzel. We might be hiring divorce attorneys after this episode. The Atlantic Division, which we've been waiting basically since we started this podcast to talk about. We have extremely differing takes on a couple of these teams, Maddie, but I think this is the most excited I've been to start recording here and get it into you. What's been going on this week for you?
Not much, just prepping myself for the potential beginning of the end here. I feel like we were trying to get to the number 13, but 11 might be our breaking point here with the Atlantic. Saved best for last, obviously, coming up here at the start of the season. But yeah, it's funny. I got my Minnesota gear on. Was watching the game Saturday night. Not sure if any college football fans are out there, but you can imagine how well I feel about that team right now. So I ended up, right around halftime of that game, putting on some Stars Blues preseason. And I think hockey in general just puts me in a better mood. So I'm just glad that we got through the last 3 or 4 months without it. And looking forward to both the NHL as well as the college season that's coming right around the corner.
Just to set the tone bright and early here, I came prepared. 3-0, my Buffalo Bills. Matt, would you like to enlighten them on how your team's doing?
I think if anyone wants to look at the NFL standings and find the striped B on the in the logo there, they can find it themselves. I have really good faith in our listeners, but yeah, thankfully there's 14 games left to make a little comeback here.
The Cincinnati Bengals, for anybody who's wondering, are 0-3, Matt's favorite team in the NFL. Hockey's starting soon, and you get to watch your San Jose Sharks lose starting in about a week and a half here. But we'll be covering the Atlantic Division here tonight. And, we said the Central was one of we said unarguably the toughest division last week. The Atlantic Division's a pretty damn tough conference to be looking at today here. We'll get into that in just a second. But first, running through some other NHL news around the league. A big week last week for the Dallas Stars. They signed Esa Lindell and Thomas Harley. And rather than a big week, it was a big night for the Dallas Stars. 2 huge RFA signings for them, Matt.
Yeah, getting that, before preseason and getting a couple of their blue liners locked up really ensures that top 4 D pair for the next few years is going to be really solid. Obviously, we saw Harley make a huge jump last year, especially towards the end of the season and into the playoffs. And when you think of just stability on the blue line, the first name that ever comes to my mind would be Esa Lindell. He's been in Dallas for his entire career, and he's just been super consistent on that blue line. And to get him locked up for 5 more years in Dallas, it just made so much sense. And I think the timing right before the season, get all of that drama out of the way now and kind of just look locked and loaded coming up for the upcoming season.
I'm a big time Thomas Harley fan. I think a huge presence on their blue line, especially with a couple of the departures they had. And they're going to need him to step up big time. So that's a great guy. Young talent to get done there. New Jersey with a big bridge deal. They get Dawson Mercer done on a 3 times $4 million deal, and that'll put him right up to probably UFA contention here if he can really light it up for the Devils. But man, the Devils just continue to build and build and build, and a roster that's going to be stacked for years to come, at least for the 3 that Mercer is now signed on for.
Yeah, and in this offseason, they ended up trading one of their bigger prospects in Alexander Holton. And kind of the reason why he didn't get a spot in that top 6 was the emergence of Dawson Mercer. He shows up first day as a rookie and already makes a huge impact in some sheltered minutes. He continues to play well the more and more this team trusts him. And I think this bridge deal just shows how willing they are to continue to have them as an integral part of their forward group.
Nolan Genther, 8 years, $7 million for a guy who hasn't even played a full season. The Utah Hockey Club getting the ink on their first official contract there, Matt. What do you think about this one? This is a lot of people saying a great deal for a kid who lit it up at the end of last year, but he was up and down between the NHL and the AHL. $7 million is the price tag, but when you look at Brock Faber getting an 8x8, this is a young kid that could be the future for this franchise. Do you think it's an overpay or a value pick here with Genther coming in at $7 million?
I think we're going to look at the end of this term and be like, how the hell did Utah get this done, right? I'm a huge pro Dylan Guenther fan. I think him and Logan Cooley had so much chemistry at the end of last year. And obviously, if you're Utah, you expect Cooley to be, 1 or 2C moving forward in the future. And to keep his wingmate, that the two of them had, played unbelievable together. I know Guenther didn't get the most opportunities towards the end of last year, but you move the team to Utah and you start to try and figure out, who's that guy, who's going to be the face of the team for years to come. And I think 8 years is a great term for Guenther. You get him on that extra year. You let him continue to get opportunities both on the power play and kind of playing up in that top six. And I mean, for me personally, I'm a huge fan of the deal. I think it's going to be similar to what people are thinking about right now with the St. Louis Blues and how they got Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas on those long-term deals. I think the same is going to be said with Guenther 3 or 4 years down the line.
Preseason underway and hockey rolling. The hockey club with their first ever goal scored, unfortunately on the wrong net, pulling the goaltender for a extra attacker pre-power play, and it comes up to the blue line, misses the D-man right under the stick and all the way down the ice into the back of the net. And the hockey club, fortunately, 1, it was in preseason, 2, it was not in their own rink. That's unofficially the first ever goal scored in that uniform.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong. I saw the video a couple of times and didn't hear the audio on it. I'm pretty sure it was their 8x7 man, Dylan Guenther, who put that puck in the net. So you sign the guy for $56 million. The kid just puts the puck in the net. What can you ask more for the guy?
Fortunately, it was preseason, and it won't count as a -1. From Logan Cooley to his namesake, and we'll finish it off on our NHL news quickly here. Logan O'Connor in Colorado getting a deal done at 6 years on a $2.5 million extension. A huge bargain deal for a team in cap trouble there. O'Connor has been a nice fit with the Avalanche. He'll now be there for 6 more years.
Yeah, you think of the Colton Sisson deal in Nashville and how well that's paid off dividends for that team. In the Central Division as well, you think of a pretty similar deal here with O'Connor. Was on that Stanley Cup team back in 2022 and, has been a real staple in that bottom six, killing penalties, doing all the dirty work that allows guys like McKinnon and Rantanen to go out there and play, 22 minutes a night with a huge objective of scoring goals. So I think, $2.5 million, obviously it's not the minimum, but it's definitely on the lower side. And as the cap continues to go up, that's going to take less and less of a percentage of the total cap. So for me, I'm a huge fan of the deal. And I think if he continues to, play to his level and continue to provide so much value in ways outside of putting the puck in the net, I think this is going to be a pretty good deal for Colorado.
Tough week for the podcast market, especially in Boston, as John Sweeney taking a shot at the Spit and Chicklets podcast and saying that the podcast market does not consist of real media and the Spit Up on Yourself podcast. Good news for us. If we make it through this episode, hopefully, fingers crossed, we might be the next #1 hockey podcast up and coming here. If Chicklets loses the fame from all the GMs here, we're going to have to start rubbing elbows pretty quickly, though. But that was quite the comment there Sweeney made it, rather than answering the question on what was going on with Jeremy Swayman.
Yeah, Sweeney seemed to be in an absolute corner in that interview. He seemed to be like, he didn't want to be there from the start. What do you expect with the questions coming at you, right? This guy's needed money for a while. You trade Olmark, and now you're sitting here in September 24th. You still don't have a deal done, right? Yeah, Don, you're going to take some heat for it. You can't go at the media for asking, bringing up whatever they can hear and, asking the right questions at you. If he's going to come at the non-media based podcasters like myself, I'm going to have to go back at Don Sweeney. So I felt like a little bit of a personal comment there.
Perfect segue for the purpose of today's show, our Atlantic Division breakdown. We're bringing on guest Jimmy Murphy, the reporter and columnist for the Boston Bruins, also the host of the Eye Test on the Sick podcast with Pierre Maguire. He'll be coming on momentarily after we get through our first team here. But Matt, we'll go in order of last year's division standings and start with the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. Florida with some big losses, especially on their defensive core. The primary signing coming in Sam Reinhart. He gets a big-time dollar value contract there, coming in at 8.65 on the extension. But the defensive losses, they still have Bobrovsky hopefully locking him down, but he's starting to age here. He's got his Stanley Cup hangover, especially the way that they've been going at it this summer on the Stanley Cup tour. Where do you see Florida coming into this season? I have regression, you do as well, but we both still have them as playoff contenders coming up.
Yeah, when you have a top six like they do, right, with the line of Verhaeghe, Barkov, Reinhardt, and having Matthew Tkachuk on your second line, it makes it really hard for me to say that this team isn't a playoff contender year in and year out, especially with the level of goaltending that Sergei Bobrovsky has provided over the last few years. I know there's some on our podcast who are very anti-paying goaltenders. However, I think in the playoffs and towards the end of the regular season the last 2 years, Bobrovsky has made a little bit of an argument as to why maybe you should pay him that $10 million. Early on in that contract, there was a lot of hate from Panthers fans in terms of just not living up to those expectations. And I think he shut the door on that as well. So, when you've got a goaltender playing as hot as Bobrovsky over the last 2 years, and you've got that experience and that grit that team has, I think they're still for sure a playoff contender. Like you mentioned, where I'm nervous is the depth. Last year they had, a ton of injuries throughout the year, and they were able to kind of plug and play some guys like Oliver Ekman-Larsson, for example, who were able to take on some big responsibilities when guys went down. And I'm just nervous if they're an injury or two away with some guys like Aaron Ekblad, for example, who's, more of an injury-prone player in his career. I just don't know who goes and fills that responsibility on the right side for the defense. So for me, I think, they're definitely going to be like up there and top of the Atlantic, but I think, they're an injury or two away from being in a really tough situation, especially if that injury comes in goaltending, because after Bobrovsky, now you lose Stolarz, who was a fantastic 1B situation there. Now you're looking at Spencer Knight, who was back in the player rehab program and kind of been up and down in the AHL and the NHL. Very highly touted prospect. Is he finally ready to make that step up? And if he's not, kind of where do you go from there? So for me, I'm a little nervous about the depth. Obviously, I think some players like Mackie Samaskovich has to step up and really take on a more substantial role. But I think overall, this team is definitely still a playoff contender.
Spencer Knight, certainly his year here to take it, and he's been the talk of this team since he lit it up with Team USA in the World Juniors. Hasn't quite panned out yet. He's been up and down between the NHL and the AHL, and as you mentioned, some struggles in the player assistance program. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. Ekman-Larsson, I think, is one of the major losses on this team. You brought up his name, but looking at the defensive core now, you have Nate Schmidt coming in to go on the right side alongside Gus Forsling. And the third pair there is now Kulikov and Bjornfoot. So that's a completely untested third pairing there. It'll be interesting to see if Schmidt can step into a bigger role alongside Forsling. But even the top line, bringing in Nico Mikkola to go with Ekblad, do you think this D-core in front of, if it's Spencer Knight coming in, is good enough to offset the offensive prowess of that top six?
Yeah, I think it can get the job done. Ekblad wasn't there for a decent chunk of last year as well. So you've kind of had that experience of kind of next man up mentality. And the people that they did bring in on some of the low contract deals, you mentioned Schmidt, Bjornfoot's there now. One that you didn't mention that I also really like the potential of is Adam Boqvist. So I think they have some pieces in play that, you've seen sparks of, and, there's a potential there. Obviously, potential is so good until you actually can play up to that level, but I think it's good enough. I think that goaltending in that top six is just so strong that you can kind of have a weaker decor like Florida kind of looks like right now and still be competitive. But I think, like you mentioned, if there's any big question mark here, it's obviously going to be that back end.
Send it over now to our guest for the episode, Jimmy Murphy. About 30 minutes with him and a great insider perspective, especially on the drama going on with our next team, the Boston Bruins, as well as the rest of the Atlantic Division. Matt and I will be back right after to continue our run through the Atlantic Division before we hit our division predictions and today's Parlay Party Premium with 5 picks apiece, since it's just the two of us. Back in a second, you're listening to the Fifth Liners podcast. Welcome on now, Jimmy Murphy. A great pleasure to welcome on now the reporter and columnist for the Boston Bruins, Jimmy Murphy. Jimmy, what's going on?
Not much, my friend. Just happy to have hockey back. Training camp has started, so it's a great time of year. I honestly think the fall, not just because of the weather, but for any sports fan, and specifically if you're a hockey fan too, it's just great. You got hockey, you got college football, you got pro football, baseball starts to really matter. So it's a great time of year. So I'm excited.
I was on a call earlier this week for ECAC women's hockey with your partner Pierre McGuire. So that's
great.
All the more exciting for us as college hockey starts to go. And
yeah, he's going to be doing a lot with you guys. I heard.
NHL coming up.
He's going to be doing a lot of work with you guys. I heard this year.
He is, yeah. He did a great job with. I got to meet him down at the women's tournament at Colgate, and then watching the men's. It's definitely a huge help for the conference to have him going versus before they had guys like me and a couple students doing it. So that's a big upgrade for them.
Well, no, they don't shortchange yourself, man. You're good too.
The Boston Bruins right now are one of the remaining hot topics, holding out on their biggest RFA. That's where we'll start here. What in the world is going on with Jeremy Swayman? And we record here on Thursday. By the time this drops early next week, it could be a complete revolution. But from what it sounds like right now, they're still not close. Swayman obviously thinks he's worth quite a bit of money. The GM in the media was going after a couple other media members in the Spit and Chicklets podcast and saying that a lot of the reports aren't true. What have you seen with the Swayman contract, and where do you think that's at as now camp's getting underway?
Well, look, I'll rewind a bit. I don't know the exact date. I want to say maybe the end of July, early August. I wrote a piece because a friend of mine, I forget who, it's going to kill me now, a scout friend of mine, just pointed out, he said, I got a weird feeling on this Swayman thing. And he said, I think it's going to go for a long time. And I said, why is that? He says, well, do you not remember William Nylander? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, who's Swayman's agent? And of course, it's the same agent as William Nylander, Louis Gross. And William Nylander, to this point in the cap era, has the longest. Now, we all, I know, it's common to call it a holdout, but I guess technical term is just sit out, because you can't hold out if you don't have a contract. So I get that. But we'll just call it a holdout for all intents and purposes. And William Nylander held out of camp. He didn't play. And then he went right into the season, and he didn't play until, I think, December 2nd. And he signed 3 hours before the 5 p.m. deadline on December 1st for an unrestricted or restricted free agent to play with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And that was in 2018. And, Louis Gross has had a reputation to play hardball. And then you look at just the track record of Swayman's contract history so far. They went to arbitration last year, and I think it was pretty close this year. And I think maybe both sides are regretting that they didn't do that this year, because it would be signed, sealed, and delivered by now, and Swayman would be in camp. But at the same time, this, to me, I know to a lot of people, but to me, this, after learning that and really studying the track record of Lewis Gross, this isn't a surprise. And then when Swayman, I think weeks later, it was still in August, probably the third week of August. Gosh, it's going to kill me what the name of the podcast was. Some guys out of Boston got him. Good on them. Like Mark Lewis, I think might be the guy's name. Anyhow, he goes on there and he's talking about everything that's going on. And he starts saying, well, this isn't just about me. This is about the players that come after me, and about the union, about the CBA, and starts saying that his contract, which he's right, is going to set the table for other goalie contracts in the goalie market. And then you have, I think it was last week or 10 days ago or something, Igor Shesterkin, who's looking to sign an extension with the Rangers, is probably going to get the richest goalie contract ever. By the time he does that, says, I'm not going to sign anything. I'm not going to talk anything until Swayman's contract is set, because that's going to dictate the current market. So this has become bigger than just Jeremy Swayman and the Boston Bruins and Lewis Gross. This is about the CBA. This is about the players union. This is about owners. And when Swayman goes out and says that stuff, and good on him, he's absolutely right, and he has every right to handle this the way he wants. And I'm actually impressed by a player who takes the time to learn about how what he does can help future players, and thinks about the union like that, because we don't see that often with players these days. But the problem is, who's the Boston Bruins owner? You know his name. What's his name?
Yeah, the Fenway organization.
No. Jeremy Jacobs, Delaware North.
Yes, yep.
Yes, Fenway owns the Penguins. So Jeremy Jacobs, just for everyone out there that doesn't know, he runs the NHL. Don't let anyone, everyone says, oh, Bettman this and Bettman that and Daly this and Daly that. And everyone blames Bettman. Why won't they put a team in Quebec City? Or why is there a hard cap? Or why is it? Bettman's just working for the owners. And the head of the owners, the head of the board of governors, has and will be until he passes away, Jeremy Jacobs. This guy is what they call a hawk. And he is all business. And I'm guessing when he saw, or heard whatever happened, when he heard about Swayman's comments, talking about the union and paving the way for future contracts, I don't think that's going to go over well up in Buffalo with Jeremy Jacobs, especially with the CBA coming up in 2 years. So my guess is that up until that point, I think things were on a smooth path. I think things were going well, and I had heard they were going well. Had they reached an agreement? No. Were they in the ballpark of each other? I think they might have been. But I think once that happened, I think Jacobs, because I know he's done this before, whether it's been in a Kappa or even before that, when players have spoke up about union stuff and taken it upon themselves to go at the owners, so to speak, Jacobs does one or two things. He either says, you give him an offer and that's it, and it's firm, or you trade him. And so that's why I think whatever offer is there right now, it's not going to change. And that's not Don Sweeney's fault. I don't want to blame Swayman, but I do believe that if he didn't speak his mind on the union stuff, I think we're seeing him in camp right now. And I think we're in for the long haul here. And this is bigger than Swayman and the Bruins. And I think a lot of it has to do with Jeremy Jacobs. I think Don Sweeney's just doing what he's told right now. So I really hope that the media and fans don't come down hard on him.
It's interesting. We talked about a month ago now with Jim Cerny from the New York Rangers, and kind of the same thing that you said with Igor. And he said, I believe there's absolutely no way he goes anywhere near contract negotiations until Swayman gets it done. So certainly
there you go.
Swayman's exactly right on that. It impacts the whole market. But looking back to the beginning of the year, they had Linus Ullmark, who could have been their guy for the long term, and Swayman there. And obviously the trade talks around Allmark had been going on for a little while. He had a no trade list, so they had to get him done when they did with the trade to Ottawa. Looking back, and obviously it's it's hard to say that back then, but had they offered a lower deal at the time that Allmark was on the team still earlier in the year, do you think that would have gotten done, or do you think we'd still be in the same spot?
No, I think if they had tried, now I don't know, maybe they did try. So I can't sit here and say that. But my guess at the time, I always wondered. I mean, I remember saying this to Pierre Maguire on and off the air. Why aren't we hearing anything about an extension? Why did both sides seem so content to just leave this, to the end of the year? Why would the Bruins do that, considering that, any player that goes into a contract year is going to dictate what his next contract is? I mean, how many times do we see players who maybe were kind of, trekking along, not really going too far upwards with a trajectory, and then they hit their contract year and they boom, right? And then they get their big deal and then they go back down a bit. We always see that. So I didn't understand why the Bruins were going to leave that to chance. And the other thing I don't understand, I'm going to rewind to not this offseason, but last offseason. I think they knew pretty much that Swayman was always going to be their number one guy, and eventually they were going to have to move Linus Ullmark. I don't know what was on the table in terms of trade offers as they entered the 2023 offseason, but Linus Ullmark's value after winning the Vezina in the season he had, his value is never going to be higher, right? It's just fact. That was his peak, in my opinion. I think that was the highest Linus Ullmark will ever get. Do I think he's going to help the Ottawa Senators and have a good year? Yeah, I do. And I think they might make the playoffs and he could be part of that. But I don't think his value was ever going to get higher than it was in 2023. So my confusion is, why didn't you try to trade him then? And then sign Swayman then, before he goes out and has the amazing year he had this past season, sign him to a reasonable cap-friendly deal for yourself. That's what I would have done. But you know what? That's in the past. You can only go forward right now. And I think if I'm the Bruins right now, I need to sit down face-to-face with Swayman, maybe bring Brad Marchand into the room and say, look, we want to give you the money you deserve, okay? But you put us in kind of a jam here. You've only played 44 games. Is the highest amount of games you played in a season. You were amazing in those 44 games. You were even better in the playoffs. There's no way we even sniff game 6, if not for you, in the second round against Florida. There's no way the Bruins have a chance against Florida, if not for Swayman. He was the only thing keeping them in that series. End all be all. Even the Panthers said it. Paul Maurice said after the playoffs were over, in his press conference, I remember it, you can go back and look at it, he said that Swayman was the best goalie they faced throughout the whole playoffs. Better than Shesterkin. So just take that on note, right? So look, we know how good you are and how much better you can be. But right now, we just need you to come down a bit. And I don't know. You talk to Marchand, you say, look, I've done it. Bergie did it. We all did it. And you hope that maybe you can find some common ground. Otherwise, I think this is going right to December 1st. I really think if we don't see something in the next 2 weeks, it's in for the long haul. And the Bruins are going to be in some trouble because, with all due respect to Eunice Corpusalo and Brandon Bussey, who will likely be the backup if Swayman doesn't start the season with the Bruins, that's not a tandem that I think is going to help them get off to the start they need.
Bring in Lindholm and Zadorov, big pieces to add, especially for the center depth. Zadorov, a big guy to add physicality. That's always been the Bruins' mantra. Marchand came out with that he's had some surgeries over the offseason. A video earlier today, though, looks like he's in pretty good form as we get close to camps going, and he should be ready to go, it looks like, around the start of the season. But as you mentioned, potentially no Swayman, goaltender questions there. The pieces that they bring in, how huge is that if Swayman's not there, to locking up the rest of the questions around this lineup? And the media always seems to have a negative perception around the Bruins, whether it was last year, everyone thinking they're going to miss the playoffs, they go on to make the second round. Now this year, they've only gotten better, but with a couple question marks, it still seems the same way that a lot of people are not talking about Boston in a conference where they've been at the top of the Atlantic for pretty much my entire life. talk about first the pieces on Lindholm and
Make me
Zadorov.
feel old there, buddy. Thanks.
Talk first about what Lindholm and Zadorov are going to add, and then where this team is going. Do you see them still being a perennial threat this year?
Well, as you just stated, a lot of it has to depend on what happens with Swayman. That being said, I do think one thing they do have going for them, should Swayman miss some time to begin the season, is what they did by adding Zadorov to the defense there. That is a very big defense. I don't have all the charts in front of me, the depth charts on defense for all 32 NHL teams right now, but I would imagine in terms of size, height, and weight, they have to be in the top 5. I mean, they've got some trees on defense right now, some guys that are going to be really hard to move in front of the net. This is a defense that, even dating back to the Bruce Cassidy days, that the Bruins always wanted to get. They chased Noah Hannafin forever. It didn't work out. He ends up getting traded to Vegas and signed an extension with them. But they always wanted big, mobile guys. Is Zadorov as good as Noah Hannafin? No, but he's good. He's a B compared to an A from Hannafin. And he's got grit. He plays the old big bad Bruin style. He's passionate. He's a good team player. So I think that's the one thing is if I'm Jim Montgomery, I'm kind of looking at training camp in 2 ways. You kind of got to coach training camp in the preseason with Swayman here or Swayman not there, right? You have to have a backup plan if he's not going to be there. And what I would do is, look, we depend on these big guys in front of the net. We clog up the neutral zone as much as we can. We push everything to the outside. We don't let rebounds become a situation that we can't get out of. They need to rely on that defense heavily. And I think they've got guys up front, too, that can get back, obviously, and help with the defenseman there, too. So I think that is going to be a key addition, even more so if they don't have Swayman. I like their defense. To me, it is the best constructed defense I've seen in the Don Sweeney era. So that's how much I like that blue line.
Looking at the Toronto Maple Leafs, they stick together with the core 4. After all the questions on if they can get it done or not in the playoffs, one more year here to prove that for those top guys. Change in the captaincy. Now Austin Matthews will lead the team forward. Coaching change as well, but this team overall got better. The regular season has never been a question, but sticking with the 4 guys, and especially going back to that Game 7 goal against Boston, where there were certainly some of those top players on the ice not moving their legs anywhere near David Pastrnak. Was that the right thing to do in your mind, keeping the same group in the forward core with a lot of young prospects coming out and a lot of potential ways they could have traded to bring new faces in?
I don't know, though, but could they? Those are some tough salaries to move. I know they're highly skilled, but let's look around the league and how many teams are up against it with the cap, and how many teams have gotten themselves in cap trouble. I don't know how easy those players were to move. Yeah, you look at, like I said, you look at their stats, you look at their potential and their star power, and you say, well, why wouldn't I want them? Well, there's this thing called the salary cap, and that always gets in the way. So I wasn't, I imagine they explored trades. I'm not privy to any of that information, but that's just my guess. But I don't think it's as easy as everyone thought to move some of those guys out and bring some new faces in. However, I also think that once they realized that they were moving on from Keefe and they could bring in a guy like Berube, I think they wanted to give that core one more chance to see how they respond to a tougher coach, a coach who's won a Stanley Cup, a guy who's going to be no nonsense. I think they really want to see, okay, do these guys have the character we need to take it to the next level, to win more than one round in the playoffs? Can they get us there? And truth be told, let's not forget, they're only a couple plays away from making it to the second round against the Bruins. They were down 3-1 in that series, and they dominated the second half of that series. They played well in Game 7 as well. That was a hell of a game. They did not get blown out of the building by any means. And every Bruins player, I'm telling you, if you looked at them right in the eye and you had them on your podcast and said, do you think you were lucky to get out of that Toronto series? They'd say yes. They really were lucky to get out of that series against the Leafs. You brought up that play against Pastrnak, and yes, there were some players who got caught flat-footed, but that's a planned play. I've seen them do that play a ton of times in practice and try it many times. It just never worked. It worked this time. That's it. And sometimes teams are going to get caught by surprise when a trick play, so to speak, works. We see it in football too. How many times do those trick plays work in football? Hardly ever. But when they do, the other side is going to look really dumb, right? That's all. I don't want to come down too hard on Toronto for that. So I want to give them a lot of credit for the way they fought in that series. Let's see how they do under Berube. I think the one thing I'm really interested in is why they didn't address their goaltending. Like, how do you still think that goaltending you have right now is going to carry you through? Was Joseph Wall really solid in those games when they climbed back into that series? Yes. Do they maybe win game 7 if he doesn't get hurt? Yes. But he's still young. He's way more unproven than Swayman. He's got a lot of growing to do. To me, he's still your second choice. They need a legit, bona fide, proven starter. And I don't see it right now in Toronto. And I think that is still their Achilles heel. But I do think that if they can figure that out along the way this season before the trade deadline, or if they, who knows, maybe these goalies come out and play way above their head. I don't know. But if they can figure the goaltending situation out, I think they're a threat not only in the Atlantic Division, but I think they're a threat in the playoffs as well.
Stanley Cup's been buying real estate down in the state of Florida, and after a long stay in Tampa Bay, it's now back with the Florida Panthers. But Florida lost some significant pieces and had to put a big tag to keep Sam Reinhart around. They lost a lot, especially on the defensive core. Tampa Bay, another team that was in headlines all over the place with letting Steven Stamkos go to bring Jake Gensel in. They also lose Sergachev, who's a huge piece of their blue line. First, with Florida, can they stay relevant and specifically in the top? I think there's going to be a big Stanley Cup hangover, but are they going to be the same force this year? And then with Tampa, where do you see that team trending here? They had JJ Moser on a lower tag, who's a talented young defenseman, but this team is just fighting off regression year after year as the Atlantic Division seems to continue to catch up.
Well, don't forget the other guy they added, Mr. Jake Gensel. No,
Gensel.
Yeah, I mean, he's no slouch. I look at Tampa. I look at Julien Brisebois as kind of the Bill Belichick, Robert Kraft, combo that kept the Patriots dynasty going for so long. It's amazing, but he's got an even harder cap. It's amazing what Brisebois has done under a really hard cap, and especially the fact that he did it when the cap got even lower because of COVID and everything that happened over the last 4 years. I give him all the credit. And then, I'm with you. I keep waiting for them to drop. I keep waiting for them to miss the playoffs. But then they go out and get those guys. And by the way, Moses, I'm glad you brought him up. That could go down. Honestly, Casey, I think at the end of the season, we look back. If I have you on my podcast or you have me on yours and we look back on the season, we might be, wow, that was one of the most underrated pickups of the season. Pierre and I have loved that guy. I stay up a lot to watch those Pacific games, and he's always impressed me. But I think because a lot of us don't see him play because those games aren't starting at 10:30 for the East, I don't think he gets enough credit. And I think he's going to blossom in Tampa Bay. I really do. You got to factor in the fact that Vasilevsky had a down year. He's going to be pissed off and want to redeem himself. And then, like I said, you bring in Gensel. I like Tampa. I think I'll say right now, and I haven't said this anywhere else because we haven't done our Atlantic Division preview on the eye test yet, but I'm picking Tampa to finish ahead of Florida. I'm completely in agreement with what you said earlier. I expect a huge Stanley Cup hangover from the Florida Panthers just because, and it's not Zito's fault because I just said Brisebois is kind of an exception to the rule. Most GMs have a lot of trouble under a hard cap to keep a team together after a Stanley Cup win. It's just the way it goes. It's just natural. And also you factor in the Stanley Cup hangover, which is real. We had Bruce Cassidy on last week on our podcast, and he spoke about it. And he said, it's funny. We started off, November 1st, we're the best team in the league after winning the Stanley Cup. And we're like, oh, what's this hangover thing they talk about? And then the roof fell in, then it all caved in and guys start getting hurt and wearing down. And so it's real. Whether it hits you in the beginning, the middle, or the end of the season, that thing's real. I got a feeling it's going to hit Florida a lot earlier because I think Florida's in the toughest division in hockey. I think the Atlantic Division is the toughest division in hockey right now. So I'm with you. I think. Do I think they missed the playoffs? No, but they'll come close. I think Tampa is actually in better shape than the Florida Panthers out of the two Florida teams. And you mentioned the Stanley Cup staying down there. Well, looks like the Stanley Cup's going to have to start paying some income tax after this one.
Rest of this division is what makes the Atlantic so interesting. I think the Central and the Atlantic are the two deepest in the league. And the four teams here have all been out of the playoffs for a long time now and have all been rallying draft picks, have crazy young cores and young talent. And Detroit goes out and adds Tarasenko with Patrick Kane, who they brought in last year. Now they maybe have one of the most lethal top sixes in the NHL. Buffalo buys out Jeff Skinner. I am extremely confused by that decision with a guy who's a year removed from being a point per game player. And I understand maybe the buyout after a tough year, but it was a tough year all around in Buffalo. And the bigger thing was that they didn't use that to get anything out of the cap on July 1st. They didn't have any big pickups going forward this year. Ottawa is a team that I think is going to be the best out of all of the bottom four this year. I'm a huge believer in Brady Tkachuk and their core stepping up. But when you look at the roster, they have a lot of gaps as well. And then there's Montreal, who you guys talk about on the Sick podcast quite a bit, but seem to go under the radar with some of the acquisitions they've made. They bring in Patrick Laine. Lane Hutson's going to be a stud. And out of these four, it seems like anybody could get there. I think Buffalo has the lowest chance this season, but all the expectation is on Yzerman and the Red Wings this year. Same with Ottawa, pretty much, that they've got to get in there at some point soon, or there's going to be big changes. And Montreal's coming pretty quickly. Which teams excite you the most out of the second half of the Atlantic and those teams trying to make playoff pushes? And out of those four, who's going to be the first to do it? Do you think it'll be this year?
Yeah, I think one of those four make it. And I'm with you. Those four teams, I feel like as we go down the stretch run this year, they're almost going to be already in playoff mode. And it's almost like they're going to have their own sort of mini playoff, almost like in COVID when we had the play-in round. I feel like that's what we're going to get in the last 25 games from those four teams. And I'm with my co-host, Pierre McGuire. I think 5 teams do make it from the Atlantic to the playoffs and 3 from the Metro, just because of one of those 4 teams. And honestly, I'm not high in Buffalo. So I don't think Buffalo's the one that makes it out of those 4. I think they still need – I think Lindy Ruff will help them. I think he changes the culture. I think they'll improve. But there's just something about them that doesn't grab me. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But out of the other 3, I think, and I'm putting Montreal in there, I think any of those 3 could make it. I really do. I look at the Red Wings right now. Again, their weakness to me is like the Maple Leafs, goaltending, even though they're currently carrying 3 goalies on one-way contracts and 2 more on two-way in camp that they're talking about could make the roster. I think one of those guys gets traded. But there's something about them. But the only thing I look at the Red Wings, and Pierre has pointed this out numerous times, and he's dead on about it, is they probably do make the playoffs last year if Larkin doesn't miss 28 games. Remember when Larkin got hurt? Remember where they were when he got hurt compared to where they were when he came back? And when he came back, they did make a late push. So I think he's the difference. He stays healthy. I give them that slight edge over Ottawa. But then I look at Montreal as this team that could come in and just screw up everything for all of them, and just surprise everybody. They've got cap space. They could do something still in season. So it's going to be fun watching all of those. And I think one of them definitely makes it, but I don't think it's Buffalo.
Big piece I'm interested to see it on the defensive end is if Detroit can hang in there. I think Shane Gostisbehere is a big loss there, where he played a lot on their power play. And I don't think their D-core is strong enough, which is where I have Detroit regressing a little bit as well. Montreal, Lane Hutson has been all the talk around
Yeah.
their prospect camp. Will he be a one-way NHLer, do you think, this year? And can he make an immediate impact where defense is such a hard position to get going at?
Yes. I think it's all in how you use him. I think he's got to come in. I think, Pierre said this yesterday. I agree with him. I think they should go with 7D for sure. Excuse me, and 11 forwards. And you utilize him. He's a situational guy. He's on your third pairing. He definitely could be on your PP1 or maybe your PP2. I'm not sure, but I think he's going to be on the roster. Good thing is he doesn't have to pass through waivers if he has to go down, if they have to send him down to improve on things. But I think he sticks. He's going to be a huge addition to that team, but it's going to take time. I think that, the Canadians as an organization, there's nothing they can do about the way we're hyping him. The fans are hyping him. There's nothing they can do about that. That's going to happen, especially in the biggest hockey market in the world. But they need to insulate him from that, temper his expectations, temper his teammates' expectations of him, and let him develop the proper way. And I think by halfway through the season, he's going to be right where he needs to be. He's going to be a great addition. But what I kind of like about all the hype around him right now is that nobody's talking about Patrick Laine. I bet if you ask Patrick Laine, when's the last time you were in a camp heading into a season where I think afterthought's a strong word. He's not an afterthought, but where you weren't the focal point, where you weren't the biggest positive story, the biggest negative story. And he's in, like I said, a huge hockey market, but it's like he can kind of fly under the radar. I think he's in for a huge year. I really do. If he can stay on the straight and narrow, he seems to be focused off the ice. If he can find his game, that could go down as one of the, and no disrespect to Jordan Harris. I think he's going to be a very solid third pairing defenseman in the NHL. He's a great character kid. I think he'll do well in Columbus. But, if this pans out, that could go down as one of the biggest heists in NHL history. I'm not exaggerating there. I mean, this is Patrick Laine, man. Look at the stats he has. Even through all the trials and tribulations he has, look at what he's still been able to do. So imagine if, he's got his mind and his body in the right place. This could go down as one of the best stories, and he could easily win the Masterton.
He almost wants the attention, it seems like, where he says he's not a 30-goal guy. He's going to be a 50-goal guy this year. One more, Jimmy, as we take a step back and look overall at the division. If you're looking into the future here, what are you keeping your eye on? What are the big stories that you are most interested to watch unfold as we go forward, closing in on opening puck drop here coming up?
Well, I think it's what we started off with. I think the biggest story of all in the Atlantic Division right now is the fate of Jeremy Swayman and the Bruins, in effect. I think that's the biggest story. So that's something, obviously, I'm going to keep tabs on, obviously, because I'm here in the Boston area. But also, I think the Leafs, how do they react to Craig Berube, a completely different style coach, no nonsense guy. He's not going to take any BS. How do they react to that? Can they, I want to go back to what I was saying too about the way they played in the second half of that series against the Bruins. Sheldon Keefe, I know he's in Jersey now, but if you remember, they played the best defensive hockey I've ever seen a Leafs team play in like 10 years. Easy. And if they can find that game again, and then also, learn and adapt to Berube's game, because that fits right in with the way Berube plays, right? He wants you to play a heavy game. He wants you to tighten up the neutral zone. If they can do that, not be worried about highlight reel goals, and just, who cares? We win 2-1, 10-1. I don't care. If they can focus like that, they're going to be in good shape. So those are the two things I'm looking at.
Jimmy, we greatly respect your time here. Thanks so much for coming on, breaking down the division. Looking forward to the Boston Bruins. I've got them as my favorite to win the division here.
Wow,
and it's going to be a tight race with, I think the Maple Leafs are obviously a strong regular season, and then everything else that could possibly happen here in a Atlantic division that's wide open. Thanks for coming on here. Looking forward to keeping in tune with the Sick podcast, and we look forward to hopefully having you coming up towards the end of the year to see if any of those predictions panned out.
All right. And I'll tell you, you do a great job up at Clarkson, my friend. So keep it up and good luck this season.
Thank you. And thank you to Jimmy Murphy for coming on. Keep an eye on his podcast, The Eye Test, on the Sick Podcast with Pierre McGuire. He's live every day from 4 to 5 o'clock. And continued insight with all the breaking news. If you get through our episode the day it drops, that's another podcast you can keep tuned into. Continuing through the Atlantic Division here, we left off on Florida, Matt, and right into Jimmy's team with the Boston Bruins. He covered pretty much everything, but I want to just backtrack on Jeremy Swayman here and the thought of his contract negotiation as Jimmy is predicting going right to that December 1st deadline. And thinking about William Nylander, same agent, that's what Nylander did when he was in RFA. What a nightmare that could turn into for the Boston Bruins, who really have no questions up and down their lineup anywhere when you look at the skating core. But then this huge anchor weighing above them right now with Swayman's contract not done.
And I think there's two things here, right? I think first, what a distraction to the locker room. I think if there's any team that is really strong in terms of a locker room, you think of the Boston Bruins. You watch some of their Behind the B episodes that are on YouTube that are fantastic. And you see some of the videos, even when they lost the playoffs last year, I saw they were all playing craps on the plane ride home. Like that, it's just such a good culture there that, things like this aren't going to play too much of a factor, but it's still a huge distraction when your star goaltender is not showing up to camp and there's question marks around whether he's going to be available for the start of the season. The second thing is December 1st, you think, okay, maybe a month or two into the season, you still got 4 months left of being able to contend here. But I think not only the Atlantic, but the National Hockey League this year is so even, in my opinion. I think other than the top 3 or 4 teams and the bottom 3 or 4 teams, there are so many teams that I think could make a run at the playoffs that if you waste 2 out of the 6 months, that's 33% of your season right there without your star goaltender. I think Boston could find themselves in a situation where they lose a few games here and there. The morale is low in the locker room. And, if Jim Montgomery loses that locker room, that could really 180 this season, in a season that I do agree with you. I think this team, top to bottom, looks unbelievable. I love what they did on defense. I think that's one of, if not the best defensive cores in the NHL right now. They're all over 6'2". They're all over 215 pounds. They're going to beat the living tar out of you. It's going to not be fun to go into the offensive zone if you're an opponent. And then you look up front and there's complementary pieces as well that, again, very physical, not fun to play against. And you also got David Pastrnak, who's going to be year in, year out, 100-point style player. I think this team is poised for such good success if they can just figure out how they can get Jeremy Swayman back on this roster soon enough. And I would start a GoFundMe around here in Boston. I think if you just had one weekend in Southie and you took all the bar tabs combined out here, you could probably get up to $10 million to give him for this season. I mean, I think the Bostonians around here would absolutely do it. And I think sounds like Don Sweeney's not as enthused about it as he should be. But I think that's a huge question mark, obviously. But like I mentioned, this team is really poised for some success this year.
Without Swayman, with him sitting out, it would be Eunice Corpusalo and Brandon Bussey as the backup there. It's interesting to think about, and something I had never thought about until listening to Spit and Chicklets this week when they're talking about this exact situation and the former that we talked about in the news category. But thinking about Corpusalo before Ottawa was an outstanding goaltender with a good defense in front of him. Ottawa obviously lacks a strong defense there. One of the things they brought up on their episode there was the thought that maybe Boston thinks that it's not necessarily the talent of Jeremy Swayman, but potentially that any goaltender could get thrown into that defensive system and work out. And thinking about Korpisalo coming in, it is a major risk here for Swayman, because if Korpisalo steps in and can light it up here, or even just play decently, Swayman's dollar value and his standing point continues to go down. And as December 1st is going to come closer and closer, he doesn't necessarily, if the season's going well for the Bruins, have much ground to stand on there. If it goes past December 1st and he decides he's not signing, he loses the whole year and that money for that matter.
Yeah, and to play devil's advocate quick here, I completely agree with you there. I think, system defense can really help a goaltender shine. You look at Alexander Georgiev and Colorado is the prime example there. But the thing that everyone in Boston remembers last year was the amount of games in the playoffs that Jeremy Swayman just stole. I think Toronto outplayed them 5 or 6 of the 7 games in that series. Florida outplayed them in all 6, and somehow Boston was able to push it to 6 or 7 games there. I know it's not a defined stat about clutchness in a goalie, right? And like somebody just showing up in the playoffs, but Jeremy Swayman stole the job from Linus Ullmark very quickly in that playoff series. And it wasn't like Ullmark had a bad game in game 2 of the Toronto series. It was just, how do you not play Jeremy Swayman? And now we're in September 24th, and how do you not pay Jeremy Swayman? The same question that a lot of Boston fans had 4 or 5 months back, and we're still here today in September asking the same kind of question.
Same question with one less letter there. Linus Ullmark, though, I think is the prime example of that. Look at him in Buffalo. He was nothing special there. Comes over to Boston here, and he was a Vezina Trophy winner as a Boston Bruin. So that no doubt could be Joonas Korpisalo here with a revival of his career.
Right, and they've got him on a pretty good term as well. I want to say it's a little bit of salary retention as well. It's going to be somewhere in that $4 to $5 million range. So
$3 million.
So exactly, right? $3 million. You've got him for 3
Casey
or 4
Ditzel
more
special,
years.
baby.
He's got the salary caps just dialed in the dome. But right, if you get him on that and he plays well up to that contract, then you think about it, right? You have Bussy as your backup, who also had a little bit of NHL time when Swayman and Ullmark had some injuries, and he looked good too in that time. So now you've got only $4 or $5 million locked up between your goaltenders. You can add another player into that top 6 and finally get kind of that 1C to lock up and play with David Pastrnak, and suddenly that team looks even scarier.
What a year this could be for the young core here, especially Pavel Zacha, who's currently listed on the top line alongside Elias Lindholm, who they brought in this offseason, and David Pastrnak. Brad Marchand, as soon as he gets back, will try to boost up Morgan Geekie, who had some highlights last year. And then Matthew Patras is expected to slide in with Brazeau on the third line there. But a lot of young talent, and they wisely put it right alongside the veteran talent that they've had in this organization. Not only vets in the league, but vets with the Boston Bruins that have really name branded this organization. And what a way to come up if this is your first couple years in the league.
Exactly. Just like you mentioned, those young guys see the guys who have been in Boston for so long and wanted to stay in Boston for so long. There's obviously a culture there that retains players. And I think that's something really important that a lot of teams don't see is, yeah, you can put a lot of talent together, but if it's all different pieces of the puzzle and they don't fit together, then it's not really going to be a very cohesive group. A lot of question marks from the Bruins last season going into the season. I think the answers to the questions were, okay, this team is a good core together. They play very well together. They play under Jim Montgomery, and Montgomery's got them playing a system that lets everyone shine in the way that they need to. And so I think it's a very similar thing they're going to have this year, especially with, you mentioned some of the young guys. 2 guys you didn't mention that I also love, Fabian Lysell, who I think has a really good shot at making the team out of camp, as well as John Beecher, who had some time in the NHL last year, kind of in and out of the lineup. But I think when he did play, he brought a physical with slight offensive upside down in the bottom 6. So I think this team, like you mentioned, is poised for a really solid season.
Next one on the Bruins, and then we'll move on to the Maple Leafs. He Jimmy talked quite a bit about Nikita Zadorov, but the other huge addition there is Elias Lindholm. Center depth was the primary problem last year, if you could find one in this Boston Bruins team that was right at the top of the division. Lindholm comes in, fills in that center depth. How big of a piece do you see that being in the Boston offense?
I mean, it's huge. I think, Zaka was the guy last year, and he definitely stepped into the position. But I think a lot of people realize that he's just better suited off on the wing as a complementary piece on a line instead of being a driver up the middle. And I think Lindholm is poised for a really solid season, getting to play with David Pastrnak. He's 2 seasons removed for playing with Matthew Tkachuk and Johnny Gaudreau out in Calgary, and they're putting up 90, 100-point seasons altogether. Lindholm's had opportunities to play with high level players, and he's always thrived in those situations. And I don't see why him playing with Pasternak's not going to do the exact same thing. So for me, I think this is a huge addition. Obviously, center's been a problem for the Bruins ever since Bergeron and Krejci left, and they're finally finding pieces that are able to at least solve the problem.
Launching change in Leafland. Toronto sends Keefe out the door. Craig Berube comes in as the new coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Berube, notoriously a much tougher coach. Sheldon Keefe took all kinds of heat for some of the videos of his pregame speeches, his press conferences, not being hard enough on these guys. They keep the core four the same. Jimmy said he's a huge fan of that. You agree on that sentiment. Craig Berube comes in. Do you see the Leafs being a perennial threat this year? Obviously, they're the regular season dogs, but until they get to the playoffs, I think they'll be right up at the top of the division.
Right. And again, once you make the playoffs, it's so difficult to win games there, especially in the Atlantic over the last 5 years. But, this team still has all of the pieces that have gotten them 100+ point seasons over the last few years. Anytime you've got Matthews and Marner playing together, it's going to be an unbelievable top line. And I'm really excited to see how Matthew Nyes does on that top line. He's had opportunities up there before, and I think he's still definitely developing as a player in the NHL. He provides a ton of value outside of his scoring ability, but I think Nyes, every time he's been up there, has shown that he's capable of playing on that top line. And one thing that I think is going to be really interesting is I think you're going to see a little less of the Nylander-Tavares combo. I think they're going to split them out this year. It sounds like Nylander is going to have another shot playing up the middle as a 2C. So I think it's an interesting opportunity for a guy like Bobby McMann to step into there and, got a great shot on him and put up a ton of goals last year in very sheltered minutes. So I think given an opportunity, he could definitely be somebody who kind of is a prime breakout candidate. But I think spacing out some of that talent down the lineup so that you're not, overworking that top six will be a pretty interesting opportunity that Craig Berube will probably take. And I think this team, you keep bringing the same guys back, you're going to put yourself in a pretty similar situation regular season wise, right? It's, you get statistics wise a lot of large numbers, right? They play 82 games with this kind of core. They're more than likely going to put up, at or near 100 points again. The one addition that I did really love that I haven't mentioned yet is at the goaltending position. It looks like Joseph Woll is going to be that first starter out of the gates, but like we mentioned with Florida, Anthony Stolarz has played fantastic goaltending last year in some situations where Bobrovsky just needed a night off given his age. And I think he's going to be a great safety belt in case Joseph Woll does end up slipping a little bit. Personally, after watching the playoff series and kind of watching Woll this season, I'm not quite sure why they split time with Samsonov and Woll. I think Woll is very capable of taking 45, 50 games this year. But getting somebody a little more reliable and Stolarz behind him definitely helps him, be able to kind of take some chances in goal and know that there is a reliable backup there. So I think Toronto's put themselves in a really good position goaltending wise, which is something that's always been an issue over the past 3 or 4 years. So with an improved goaltending position and that same core coming back, I think the Leafs are in a really good spot this year again.
The offense and the goaltending stands out to you. For me, it is the defense of the Toronto Maple Leafs this year. That was the huge gap. The top six has always been prominent in Toronto. The goaltending is hit or miss. but the defense really had gaping holes last year. Now you look at the projected pairings here, they add Chris Tanev on a $4.5 million deal. It's the term that was the issue many people had with that deal, but for this year and for the window of this core four, that is an unbelievable add to put alongside Morgan Riley, who's your offensive guy, a lockdown defenseman there. Then they go and get Stanley Cup champion Oliver Ekman-Larsson. He'll go potentially with Timothy Liljegren. And the third pair with McCabe and maybe the most underrated signing of the entire offseason, Yanni Hakanpää, coming from Dallas on a $1.47 million deal to come and be a veteran presence. And not only that, but a great player to come into this defensive core.
Yeah, you hope his knee is kind of reconstructed at this point, right? I know there's been some big injury concerns this offseason on whether he's going to be able to actually make it to opening night. But even Simone Benoit last year played some pretty solid minutes on that bottom pair. And you mentioned Tanev. I agree with you. I think Tanev is a really great complementary piece to Morgan Riley. I think, making those upgrades on defense was definitely important after, you see TJ Brody leave and kind of, I would say, decline as he's gotten older as well. And, just not having that strong top four. And I think they're putting themselves in a position to get to that point with some of the additions they made. So, like I did mention, the offense and the goaltending definitely, I feel like, is in a good spot. But I do agree. I think the defense as well is going to help elevate this team to the next level.
If the Leafs offense isn't scary enough, Max Pacioretty in the opening preseason game was on hat trick watch, and Elliot Friedman reporting, although he's on a PTO, it sounds like Pacioretty is going to be guaranteed a deal. And again, a guy with health problems, but it sounds like Pacioretty is stronger than he's been in the last 3 years, and that would be an unbelievable addition to go on a second pair, maybe a second power play unit, especially if he's sniping goals like he did Sunday night in the preseason.
Yeah, whether it's Nylander or Tavares feeding him, I think getting him in the middle six as a scoring option in some sheltered minutes just due to the injury concern is going to be huge. I think, on power play too is probably more where he fits just based on the amount of firepower up top. But I think Pacioretty's got an opportunity to really play with some star players again and really kind of revitalize his career over the past few years that has been injury prone, to say the least.
You love the prospects. Fraser Minton has been talked about a lot this offseason. It's unclear whether or not he'll be a full-time NHL guy. What impact do you see him having in the Leafs this year?
He's a big-bodied prospect. He had a small cup of coffee with the team last year before they sent him back to juniors, and he played really well. And there were a lot of Leafs fans who wanted him to continue to play on the team. Him as well as Easton Cowan are both two very exciting prospects, probably two of the only exciting prospects in a very light Leafs prospect pool. But I think with some of the departures in that top six and kind of some of the holes that you kind of see, who's going to provide some secondary scoring behind your core four. I think Minton and Cowan are kind of the two guys that if they have a really good camp and can come in and show that they're ready to play at the NHL level, that they can provide some really helpful additional scoring. Like you mentioned Minton, though, I think the two-way play of him kind of gives him a little bit of an edge over Cowan, in my opinion. I think Easton Cowan was unbelievable last year with London, but I think giving him another year in juniors could really elevate some of his two-way game. But I think Minton, has really shown that he's kind of ready to make that step at the NHL level.
And the Leafs on maybe the most genius sponsorship idea in history. Milk has long been the jersey sponsor for the Toronto Maple Leafs. They add the helmet sponsor, Oreos. Milk and Oreos, the combination there. I wish I could have thought of that. Whatever executive came up with that deal deserves a pretty big pay raise.
Yeah, it's just marketing guru right there. You can't really say anything much about it. I absolutely love it.
It'll be either a genius investment or a terrible one for Oreos, pending Toronto's first round luck coming up in April. On to the Tampa Bay Lightning, and Steven Stamkos is gone for Jake Gensel, who comes in. Sergachev is traded. and Victor Hedman will be the captain this year. Tampa trying to fight for their playoff lives. They've continued the streak after their long Stanley Cup championship run. Tampa, I have them as a wild card. You have them as a wild card here. Are they going to be a perennial threat this year, though?
It all comes down to Vasilevsky. I think he's had some inconsistencies over the last 2 years where you've really started to see what happens when they can't rely on Vasilevsky to go steal a bunch of games in the year, whether it be injury or just some inconsistent play when he was healthy. For me, I think the big issue with Tampa, though, is that defense. I'm not sold on some of the guys that they've put in to replace that strong defense that won them 2 Stanley Cups. I think Victor Hedman's underlying numbers show that he's aging at a much more rapid rate than one would expect, especially in his defensive game, which is nerve-wracking when you've got other guys in there like JJ Moser, who's more of a, you might want to call him a two-way guy, but I think he's much more suited as a puck-moving defenseman. Ryan McDonough, who, again, more of an offensive threat, in my opinion. And then you've got the guys on the right side, whether it's Radish, Chernak, or Perbix, who are all more of that defensive style, but none of those names, with the exception of maybe Chernak, really get me super excited at this point. And I think one of those names is going to have to, stand up and play 20, 21 minutes a night. And that's a big concern for me, especially when you're not getting Victor Hedman at, 2019, 2020 Victor Hedman. Obviously, he was just named the captain of the team, so I think Tampa still has a ton of faith in his ability. But we'll see what that defense looks like. Obviously, the Cup team from 2020 and 2021 looks so much different than it does now. But I do think, at least up front, the addition of Jake Gensel, as bad as it's going to sound, is probably an upgrade from Steven Stamkos. Obviously, you don't want to lose your captain, but replacing a 33, 34-year-old winger with, Gensel coming off of an unbelievable run in Carolina at the end of last year. I'm very excited to see how he plays with Braden Point and Nikita Kucherov in a full season. And, you've got the reigning Art Ross Trophy winner in Nikita Kucherov. Your team's going to be in a pretty good situation. So for me, I think this team is still, in that middle ground of, they could make the playoffs, they could not make the playoffs just based on an injury or two. Kind of in that 8 to 22 range that I've been discussing on a lot of our podcast episodes. But for me, just because of the firepower up front combined with Andrei Vasilevsky being Andrei Vasilevsky, I think this team does have what it takes to make the playoffs.
Interesting you say that Vasilevsky is your worry. For me, that's the reason I have them getting into the playoffs. I think their power play is still going to be outstanding with the names you just mentioned. But for Vasilevsky, the injury concerns from last year came on the heels of the run so deep into the playoffs. They've, for years now, had minimal offseason. And then now finally they get an extended rest here with with still being out in the first round. But it's still an extra 2-3 weeks, maybe even a month compared to the years that they were in the Stanley Cup. And they went back to back to back there with the shortest offseason possible. Now Vasilevsky gets a little bit extra time. And also this is going to be a hungry team, I think, coming in. Vasilevsky, I think, is prone for a big season. But as you mentioned, it could be make or break. If the age starts to kick in with goalies, it's bound to happen at some point. That is going to be the factor that either gets Tampa Bay to the playoffs, where both of us have them, or sends them out here. Here we go. I'm gonna offer a plate of cookies here to start this nicely, and this one comes as a shout out to my dad, who texted me about a week ago that I was too unfriendly to Matt during episode 9 of the Fifth Liners podcast. My dad is Team Leonardo. I'll offer a small apology because I still don't feel too bad for calling you a butt kisser in the academics room, but this is where we have extremely differing opinions for the remainder of the the division here, and we'll start with the Detroit Red Wings, a team you love, team I do not this year. First, some big signings, though. Lucas Raymond gets a long-term deal. Mo Seider also gets a long-term deal. Raymond's coming in just north of $8 million. Seider on a pretty generous contract as well. They bring in Tarasenko this offseason to go into the top six. Actually, we'll get to that in a second. But first on Raymond and Seider, Matt, you're a huge fan of both of these contracts.
Yeah, I think the objective of their offseason was to get those two young guys in on long-term deals. And I think they both were trying to stay under that 8.7 million number that Crosby ended up getting, if what the rumors were thrown around correct. And they did both of those things, right? They got him right around that $8 million term. Raymond was a little closer to the number than Seider was, but I think, these are two of your faces of the franchise moving forward. I think they've played some pretty solid minutes for Detroit in the last few years, kind of during the dog days of that rebuild. Last year, you saw the flashes of competitiveness towards the end of the year where they almost had that miracle run to get into the playoffs. And Lucas Raymond was one of the main reasons why. Over the last month or two, he was over a point per game player. He's starting to really click with Dylan Larkin, who's your captain, who's going to be wearing a Detroit Red Wings sweater until he doesn't want to anymore. So I think getting Raymond on a deal under $9 million is fantastic. And then, Seider is going to be that anchor of your defense. I think as a rookie, he definitely flashed more than over the past couple of seasons. But regardless of the flashiness, I still think he's been super consistent on that back end. So I think locking those guys up and getting that out of the way now is an unbelievable idea from Yzerman, and just puts them in a situation where they can focus on winning hockey games this year.
Tarasenko comes in after winning the Stanley Cup in Florida. He'll add to the top six. They re-signed Patrick Kane. I will give you a lethal top six here in DeBrincat, Larkin, Tarasenko, Raymond, Comfer, and Patrick Kane. You think Detroit adds to where they were last year, pressing down to the wire as a playoff contender? Why are you so high on the Detroit Red Wings, Matt?
I think it's twofold. One, I think this team has a lot to prove. They were so close to the playoffs last year, and they were a John Tortorella decision away from potentially even getting in there with the whole pulling the goalie with 5 minutes left against Capitals. And I guess the second item is a lot of their players are continuing to get better and better. And they're not only getting better, but they're getting better playing together. I think, like I mentioned before, that chemistry between DeBrincat, Larkin, and Raymond, who I would project is probably going to be their first line. I know you listed Raymond off on the second line, but I think breaking up that first line would probably be a pretty poor decision if you're Detroit. And adding some scoring pieces on the wings that clearly has been an issue for Detroit in the past of who's going to put the puck in the net there. You bring in Vladdy Tarasenko, you bring back Patrick Kane. Those are guys who are going to consistently put the puck in the net. And then you've got guys in the bottom six who are able to play those bottom 6 minutes and play those bottom six responsibilities. And Joe Veleno is a guy who's a very highly touted prospect. He's been on the team for a few years. And he's really started to mold into more of a, third line kind of centerman. And he provides a ton of value outside of Joe Veleno is going to be the guy who's behind Larkin, right? Similar thing with Michael Rasmussen, He comes in, he's a highly former first-round pick, and everyone's like, Rasmussen's going to be Larkin's line mate. And now he's kind of shifted away from having that pressure of having to be the guy that steps up, and he's just given an opportunity to go and play his style of hockey. And I think those two specifically in the development that they could see next year are going to be massive. But the biggest one's probably Simon Edvinsson. Somebody has to step up and play some really big minutes in the top four next year on that D pair. And I think either Edvinsson or Albert Johansson are probably one of the two guys. And, with Edvinsson being the more highly touted prospect and playing really good hockey in the AHL last year, I think it's his time to kind of step up and really show why he was such a high draft pick. So for me, I think the development of their young talent combined with the veteran pieces that go in and play all facets of the game really make this team pretty deadly, in my opinion.
think there's a vicious hole in the defensive core and just a brutal weakness in the goaltending aspect. Husso, they bring in Cam Talbot, and I do like Alex Lyon, but he's projected to be the third guy out here. I don't think any of those three names are getting you over the hump to the playoffs. And then looking at their decor, I am a lot lower than most people are on Mo Sider. I don't think, other than the health aspect, I don't think that he is the caliber of top power play quarterback defenseman that all of the media make him out to be. I'm going to take heat for that, I'm sure, but I am not a huge fan of Mo Sider. And with the exception of Eric Gustafson, who I think is a great player, Chariot, Mata, Petrie, Hull, I don't think any of those guys are going to be able to lock down the teams they have to play in this division. The division, especially at the top half of this division, is so tough. And you say you like that bottom six. Kopp and Mott both made their name on the kid line in New York. Since then, have really not panned out for Detroit when they got both of them that 2 off seasons ago. Rasmussen, Fisher, you're big on Veleno, but and Berggren, I don't think that's a perennial threat enough when, like, compared to when you look at the depth that Detroit has, the depth or Detroit, the depth that Boston has, excuse me, the depth that the Maple Leafs have up front, the depth that even I think the Tampa Bay Lightning have. The the Buffalo Sabres, for that matter, have a deeper offensive core. I don't see Detroit coming anywhere near as close as they were last year to the playoffs this year.
Again, I think there definitely needs to be somebody to step up on that decor. You mentioned a few veteran guys who, in my opinion, probably one of those guys is not going to see consistent ice time. But, I'm just very high on the team just based on how much they fought at the end of last year, and they show that they can compete, right? If you look at the other teams that are kind of fighting for that playoff spot, whether it's, you think of maybe Buffalo, Montreal, Ottawa, like those sort of teams, I think this is the only team in the last 2 or 3 years who has even licked a competitive playoff position. And I think that's going to light a fire under their team and, kind of get them to that next step above the aforementioned teams there. And the one item I want to mention about goaltending as well, I think unless you've got, one of the guys, right? Unless you have a guy that's going to absolutely carry your team, I think just bringing in NHL caliber goaltenders and riding a hot hand isn't a horrible situation to be in. And I think if they've got, the three names you mentioned, as well as Jack Campbell, who I know a lot of people are still very low on Jack Campbell, but, a change of scenery has never hurt a goaltender. And I think, he played such good hockey with the Kings and the Maple Leafs that I think there's still got to be something in the tank there. He's still a pretty young goaltender. One of those four guys is bound to have a pretty hot run in the season. It can take, just one quick run. You look at what Nashville did last year after the U2 concert at the Sphere. Like, it was one run that really brought them from, this middling no man's land to a 99-point team last year. So for me, I think Detroit has put themselves in the best situation out of the teams in what I'll call the could be great, but also could regress again.
I don't think NHL caliber matters at all if you don't have a defensive structure in front of you, which is going to be a little bit ironic with your take on the Senators and mine coming up. But I mean, look at even LA last year. That's a team that has an outstandingly respected defense, and their goaltending tandem of guys that are both NHL caliber couldn't get it done. Ottawa, they brought in Korpisalo, who had tons of success over the past years before they brought him in. He was brutal in Ottawa last year.
Ottawa's decor of some absolute studs.
That's what I'm saying. That's how I feel just as lowly about the Detroit Red Wings though this year.
Yeah, I think it's just a difference of opinion of players. I think, the guys that are in Detroit are more likely to either step up or play at a consistent NHL level than I think some of the guys in Ottawa are.
Moving to the town close to home for both of us here. Not you anymore. I guess now your roots have upgrown and moved down out of state, but our old stomping grounds, the Buffalo Sabres, a team with maybe the worst offseason in the NHL. They send out Granato, bring Lindy Ruff in, who's really the only hope of saving the franchise. Jeff Skinner on the buyout, frees up cap. They didn't really do anything there. We talked about that with Jimmy, but um, do you see Lindy Ruff at all turning this Sabres team around? And when you look at the core here, if you want to talk about the definition of a team relying on young guys stepping up, that is pretty much the definition in Buffalo here this year.
Yeah, for me, this looks like a Utah kind of situation, but somehow like slightly worse, right? Like I think Utah's got a lot more like NHL guys that are a little more reliable. For Buffalo, it's you look at the top six, and other than Alex Tuck, like I have major question marks about every single one of those guys. Tage Thompson
I
took a
like
huge
Peterka.
step.
I think Peterka is going to be really good this year, but agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think all those guys that I'm about to mention, whether it's Jack Quinn, Tage Thompson, Dylan Cousins, Zach Benson, or JJ Peterka, I could see any of those guys getting 70 points this year. I could also see all of those guys below 50, and that's a huge problem. For me, if you don't have any sort of stability in your top six, it's nearly impossible to rely on that, and especially when you've got a bottom six that, you know, with the exception, I don't even know if I want to call it an exception, of Jason Zucker. Like, who's scoring the puck down there? Like, I'm looking at this line chart right now, and there's nothing about it that excites me. And the fact that you buy out Jeff Skinner and you don't do anything with the money, right? Like, you clearly had somewhere where you can make improvements. And I think there's a balance of any general manager between allowing your young players to develop and get opportunities, but at the same time, providing them with complementary pieces to help them develop their game. And I think they really lack on the second half of that with this roster. So for me, this team was, 70, 75 points last year, somewhere in that range. And I don't think they're any better, right? I mean, I think the only thing that we can kind of say is I think their goaltending is going to honestly be pretty solid. I think they trust Ukko-Pekka-Lehkonen enough to give him a pretty big extension. And I'm still a big fan of Devin Levi, even though he didn't really play amazing last year. His run at Northeastern a couple of years back was unbelievable, and he's a very young goaltender. So I think that back end, especially with guys like Dahlin and Owen Power and a guy who played really well last year in Bowen Byram, I think there's obviously potential with this Buffalo team. Would I be shocked if they made the playoff? No. Would I be shocked if they got 65 points this year? Also, probably not. So I think that if any team is going to be, deviant of their point over under, I think Buffalo is probably the biggest question mark in my opinion.
Potential ELCs in their top six, they're looking at Quinn Krebs, Peterka, and Benson. And Cousins at 7 million is a guy just as unproven there. A lot of young guys. They bring in Jason Zucker, who hopefully will bring that veteran presence, but they're going to have to rely a heck of a lot on Alex Tuck and Tage Thompson, who really didn't do anything last year. Maybe Tage Thompson could be attributed to injury. He was injured at the start of the season, maybe not back to full health, which we see with a lot of guys where it's not disclosed. But the decor, the left side, I love the left side of their decor with Dahlin, Power, and I really love Bowen Byram. But the right side, Yuki Haru potentially as your top right shot D with Connor Clifton and Bryson is and it goes back to the exact same argument. It's tough to win, especially when you have shaky goaltending. Pekka Luukkonen had a hell of a year last year, but he could easily come out of the gate struggling. And then where do they go? Whether it's James Reimer or Devin Levi, I think Levi is going to have an outstanding career in front of him, but it's so hard to learn NHL goaltending. He had flashes, even looking back to the 3 to 5 games he played right after he signed from Northeastern. But a tough season last year, up and down. Hopefully for Buffalo, he can get it going here this year. They signed Pekka Luukkonen on a huge money deal here, which I am really interested in to see once Levi's coming towards UFA, what that's going to mean for him, going against my don't pay the goalies argument. But maybe it's a good thing for Buffalo that Levi hasn't quite blossomed yet. But it's man, it's going to be tough for this Buffalo Sabres team. A team it's not going to be tough for this year. The Ottawa Senators, who are bound for a breakout this year. Their captain spent the offseason watching his brother lift the Stanley Cup, celebrating with the family, and just thinking about how awesome it's going to be when he gets his team there. And that's going to happen starting this year. You don't love their forward core at all. I think their top six is just as good, if not better, than the Detroit Red Wings. They have Shane Pinto back. I think he's bound for a breakout year. As long as Drake Batherson can stay out of jail, I am a big-time Drake Batherson fan. They add David Perron from the Red Wings. That's a great veteran add. Think about how great he was in Detroit and how important he was to their success, getting them just outside of the playoff push. And then you go to the top line, which I love. I love the franchise player of the NHL, Brady Tkachuk, my captain, a unicorn of the game, according to his coach, Ben Sexton, who we had on the show, who just emulated everything I think about the guy. Tim Stützle, undersized, maybe a small defensive liability there, but he had a little bit of regression last year. I think he's going to use that this offseason. A booming year there. And Claude Giroux just never ages. That guy is outstanding. It's Ottawa's year, and they add Linus Ullmark. The goaltending questions are gone. You got a Vezina candidate there. Jake Sanderson and Artem Zub, time to step up for those guys. And Matt, I just can't fathom how you're not excited about the Senators team this year. I'm going to opening night as they play the defending Stanley Cup champions, the Tkachuk game, and watching Brady Tkachuk and the Ottawa Sens get off to a 1-0 start in about a week from now.
Yeah, with the plus 230 odds on DraftKings, I hope you put the house down on that one. I mean,
that's going to be my parlay party next week. Don't you worry.
I guess where do you want me to start here? I'll go with the forward group first. They do have guys who I'm a big fan of. I do love Tim Stützle. I'm not as high on Tkachuk as you are, but I do think he's a very solid, for sure, top six forward in the NHL on any team. And you look at their guys like Norris and Batherson, they've shown so many good flashes, but neither of them have been reliably on the ice for one reason or another. And, you know, until I see that actually come to fruition, it makes it tough for me to rely on either of them in that top six. I'm not as high on Claude Giroux as I think you are. And I think Pinto is a good, but, you know, complementary piece on the line. So I don't know how much he's going to be, you know, a breakout candidate to drive that line. But the bottom six for me is a big concern. You know, you bring in Nick Cousins and you bring in David Perron, but none of the guys in the bottom six, with the exception of maybe Cousins, are, you know, bottom six penalty killing guys. And they're going to have to heavily rely on some of their top six players to go and do that. And that just takes a strain on them throughout the year. You go down to the D-core and you trade Jacob Chychrun, and now there's a huge hole on that left side. You bring in Nick Jensen, which, you know, 33, 34-year-old right shot defenseman that did not have a good season in Washington last year, and that's an understatement. You're going to have to hopefully have a guy like Jake Sanderson or Artem Zub, like you mentioned, kind of step up into a much higher role than I believe they're ready for. And then I think Linus Ullmark has a similar problem that he had in Buffalo, where he had, you know, six pylons in front of him and wasn't able to really do anything because, you're getting 35 to 40 high quality shots in your face every night. And this is a guy who, was part of the tandem with Swayman, but towards the end of the year was really the 1B there. And I'm a huge fan of Linus Ullmark. Don't get me wrong. I think he's obviously going to be an upgrade in terms of skill to Jonas Korpisalo. But I think it's a similar situation to last year where, they're going to have Linus Ullmark go and steal them games. And I don't think there's many NHL goaltenders that are going to be able to go out and steal as many games as you'll need Ullmark to do so. For me, I think they're just another year away from that. And they just, I don't see anybody else in the pipeline coming up to make a huge impact either. So, I think Ottawa's in trouble personally.
Whoa. In the pipeline. Can we talk about the preseason here? The game winner out of the rookie to beat the Maple Leafs goes end to end. Casey Ditzel, beer league hero, and Dangle Snipes Sellies on the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's a defensive prospect coming up the pipeline. If the decor is your worry here, the penalty killing unit, I think, could be fairly strong. Michael Amadio coming out of Vegas is a pretty underrated signing at 2.6. They get Nick Cousins at 800,000, which is basically an entry level deal. Cousins, say what you want, but man, he's a tough guy to play against. That's that grit that I think they were missing out of that bottom six. Brady Tkachuk plays with it every night. Hard not to like that guy. And say what you want about top six forward. I would take that guy as my franchise captain any day of the week. Not saying that he's better than Matthew Tkachuk, which every time I say that he's the man, that seems to be the only argument that you smooth-brained human beings can come up with. But man, I am so excited. I cannot wait for October 10th just to absolutely light you fools up on opening night. Last one here in the Atlantic Division, the Montreal Canadiens. Another team with a lot of excitement and potential outstanding boom coming up here this year. The offseason highlighted by the addition of Patrick Laine in the trade from Columbus. Struggles with injury, struggles with locker rooms, struggles with the player assistance program. But now he comes in, and as Jimmy said earlier, this is the first time that he has had no attention on him in the preseason camps, where typically he's the face of the camp and all the media are after him on if it's his year or not. This year, there's no expectation around him. He could go out and score 25. I'm sure the Montreal Canadiens would be pleased with that. He says he's going to score 50. Do you see Laine being the addition that Montreal needs? And that top six just continues to add weapon after weapon. I love Cole Caulfield. He continues to get it done as a scoring weapon, even though he's a small size guy. But now you add Laine into that top six. Montreal could be scary this year.
And this is a guy in Patrick Laine who has multiple 40-goal seasons, if I'm not mistaken. And pound for pound, if you look at guys who shoot the puck in the NHL, he's up there in the top five. I think obviously you haven't seen that on the ice the last couple of years for various different reasons, but now that the attention's off of him and Patrick Laine can just show who Patrick Laine really is, and that to me is, a bona fide goal scorer in the NHL. 50 is pretty high, but if he put up another 40-goal season, I would have no shock for me. I think Laine is legit. I'd love to see who they play him with, whether they decide to give him some time with Nick Suzuki or, give him Kirby Dach or Alex Newhook as his centerman. I think no matter what, he's going to have great opportunities to thrive in that offense. I'm a huge fan of Laine this year, and I think he definitely bolsters Montreal's top six to a new level.
The goaltending is a question mark. I think the defense as well for Montreal. This is a team I have 1 year away. I don't think they'll get in this year. Next year, I think they will be a serious threat. They add Lane Hudson to the defensive core. Probably similar to Luke Hughes, might take 1 year. The kid's going to score a lot of goals this year, but got to learn that defensive structure. But looking at the top 6 here, Caulfield, Suzuki, and Slavkovsky. Both Suzuki and Slavkovsky had career years last year. Slavkovsky in his second year of his career. So, but the top pick of the Montreal Canadiens finally coming into form, something that Seattle's wishing their guy could do in Shane Wright. Now you add Line in there, and the one thing we didn't mention, you said pound for pound. That's a big dude, 6'4" and well over 200 pounds, to bring some physicality to go along with those smaller guys. Slavkovsky's another big, huge dude, but Suzuki and Caulfield are on the very small end for the NHL. That's a great addition. I think one more year for the Montreal Canadiens. This is a big, maybe prove it year for some of these guys to step up into bigger roles.
Yeah, and I'm curious what your opinion is on Lane Hudson. For me, I've always been somebody who is hesitant on college defensemen who are offensive minded making the jump to the NHL. But you see what he's doing in camp, and then you see what he's doing at preseason camp, and then you see what he's doing in the preseason games. This guy is fucking legit. I mean, he is just an
first F-bomb on the Fifth Liners podcast.
I've been saving it for
shout
Lane
out Marco.
Hudson.
We're not editing that one out. I love it.
It's the first. I've saved it for
and before Matt gets too excited here and sounds like a genius, this was my take about 2 weeks ago, and Matt directly said in our group chat, it's only rookie camp.
Again, it got to prove it somewhere more than just rookie camp, right? When he was at BU, he was, obviously a freshman, but he's playing with, 20, 21-year-old guys who are, all at his level. And being a smaller guy, yeah, I do need to kind of prove it. But I think I'm sick and tired of the size matters situation here. I think Lane Hudson has just proven, and the big thing for me is his vision and his puck moving. The video clip of his breakout pass cross ice over about 4 defensemen right onto the tape of somebody going into the zone is just beautiful. Like he sees the ice differently than other guys, and his skating ability makes up for the lack of size, if you want to call that there. So for me, I'm all in on Lane Hudson now. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I've flipped switch in about 3 weeks. I've seen enough. I am all aboard the Lane Hudson train.
This kid's going to be a stud, and it's the defensive side that maybe this year will be the question. But man, this kid is an unbelievable skater. He's got a hell of an offensive presence on the ice as a rookie. And you say the question marks around college offensive defensemen. I think that's the biggest prove-it league in the world right now outside of the NHL and maybe the KHL. The talent, especially in Hockey East at the top end, when you look at BU, when you look at BC, even UMass, all of those Boston schools, it is unbelievable. And this kid proved it there, as you mentioned, looked unbelievable at the rookie camp. Now gets it into the preseason. I can't wait to see him on the ice this year. That wraps it up for the – oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I got one more thing here quickly on I don't want to bring down the level of college hockey because I'm a huge proponent of the fact that I think college hockey is an unbelievably talented league. I think college hockey is starting to really take over the OHL and the CHL as a whole in terms of kind of that top place for players to develop. I personally just think the game is slightly different in the college scene, and they play a more loose and open game, which feeds into a lot of more skilled offensive style players, especially on the back end. But you look at the top power play in Montreal next year, you put Lane Hudson at the point. You've got Caulfield, running on the right side. You've got Line shot in the 1T spot, the Ovechkin bumper. Suzuki in the middle, and then you got Slavkovsky's big ass body up front. That's one of the best power plays in the league, in my opinion. Like, I know they definitely have to play up to that, but my God, that is an unbelievably lethal power play one that can score a ton of goals next year.
We'll move on to our predictions here. Matt, I'll let you kick it off and disappoint the fan base here. This is going to be maybe the looking back at the end of the year. Well, 4 of the 5 I agree with. There's going to be one in here that's going to just eliminate you from contention when all 5 of mine hit.
Alrighty, well, we're starting at the bottom here, I'm assuming. Number 8, we've talked about it plenty enough, so I don't feel a huge need to go into too depth on this one. One of us is going to be really right, and one of us is probably be really wrong. But number 8, I've got the Ottawa Senators. I think they're still in this kind of no man's land, and obviously have made their team better, but it's better relative to not a great season last year. And they're an injury away, similar to what happened last year with Josh Norris, to kind of just being an absolute nobody once again. So I've got
say it for
I've
the
got,
social media.
Yep, Ottawa Senators. I've got them at number 8 in the Atlantic Division, pretty confidently.
Clip it, and put it on TikTok. We'll
Number
look back
7
on that in April.
Number 7, I've got the Buffalo Sabres. Again, this is a team that I could see pushing for a playoff spot. This is a team I could see in the James Hagan race. I really don't know where to put them. I just think there's a little more stability on the teams in front of them that I have in the Atlantic, to where I personally think that Buffalo is kind of still, at least a year out in terms of how many young guys they're going to rely on in that top 6. So for me, that's kind of why I have them at 7. And then number 6, I have Montreal. I think the difference between Montreal and Buffalo is really just the proven talent that they've gone out and added, as opposed to relying on some of their young talent. Like, I think Laine is just such a big X factor, and they still have guys like Brendan Gallagher and Joel Armia and that bottom 6 now taking on some pretty strong roles there, where I think they're just more of a complete team, in my opinion, than Buffalo. So for that reason, I have them at number 6.
My teams outside of the playoff race. Number 8, I have Buffalo. I think it's going to be a tough division, similar to what we talked about in the Central. Maybe not all of those teams quite yet perennial threats like the 7 that we talked about last week, but I think there's a big time gap between the top 7 and what Buffalo did this offseason to improve after a huge regression from the season before. For that reason, I have them at the bottom. I'm going to put the hottest take of all time out there right now. The Detroit Red Wings finished number 7 in the division, and come April or May, Steve Yzerman is out of the GM position. The Yzer plan fails. Yzerman out. Detroit right down there near the bottom of the division.
I think you'll have about 30 to 31 NHL teams waiting to try and grab Steve Yzerman after this year, if that's the case. I think the Yzer plan is always going to be a formidable lock, and in terms of success rate. And you're just seeing them going up right now. They were so close to the playoffs last year, and I think they're improved as a team, in my opinion. So hard to see that, but I mean, one of us is going to be wrong about Detroit, the other is going to be wrong about Ottawa. So it'll be exciting to see when they both are kind of just in that 5-6 range.
We didn't talk about it on the Detroit side. It's a little bit true for both teams, but there is a heck of a lot of pressure right now on the Red Wings upper management if it does not work out this year. And maybe it's not this year, but Detroit's got to get in there sometime soon. And I think there's regression this year. That's why I got that take. Next up,
real quick, you mentioned that. I think all 4 of, I guess not all of them are in the bottom, in my opinion, but the Montreal, Buffalo, Detroit, and Ottawa teams, like all those Atlantic teams that have been so bad for so long, all 4 of them are, upper management, hot seat, and they're all competing at the exact same time in an Atlantic that already has Toronto and Boston and the previous Stanley Cup champion, and the team that went back-to-back 4 years ago. Like, I think it's something's going to blow up in the Atlantic, whether it's 1, 2, or all 4 of those teams. Something's going to happen, because it's not a great window to be trying to make a jump in the Atlantic, and every team is trying to do it.
I would take Montreal out of that category. I think regardless on if it works this year or not, I think the steps they've taken and the prospect pool they have, it's unarguably in the top 3 at least, if not the top prospect pool in the NHL. Look at the success Laval's had. I would take them out, but I totally agree, man. It's a tough time to be a GM at the bottom of the Atlantic. Those are Montreal is my third and the first one out. I've got Montreal coming in seventh again. As I said at the end of the preview there, I think this team is close. I got them just one spot out. I don't know how close points wise it'll be, but I agree that Montreal is missing. On to our playoff caliber teams, Maddie, and the first one is not the Red Wings.
Correct. I've got in my wild card two, and I wasn't on the Metro episode, so I will say from the Metro, I think Carolina, New York, and the Rangers, that is, and the Devils are 1, 2, 3 pretty clearly, and I don't see many other teams kind of making a push into a potential playoff spot from the Metro. So for me, that's why I have the 5 spots here in the Atlantic. My wild card two, I have the Tampa Bay Lightning. I'm really nervous about the depth of that team. I really think they're an injury away, especially whether it's goaltending or defense. It's really going to put them in a tough situation to get consistent play night in and night out. So for me, I'm very nervous about that Tampa team, but I think the firepower is still there. I think Vasilevsky is not going to be as bad as he was the last 2 years. And saying bad as if he was a horrible goaltender the last 2 years. No, he's been a very solid goaltender, but I think we'll see more of the, Vezina caliber, Stanley Cup winning Andre Vasilevsky on a night-to-night basis, as opposed to the, oh gosh, he's going to let in 4 or 5 tonight, Vasilevsky. So for me, I still have them as wild card 2 because my big team, my Detroit Red Wings, as the wild card 1 here. Like I mentioned, they're going to have a fire under them. They are, so close to that playoff spot last year, and they know that this is the year. They've got their core locked up. They're focused on one thing, and it's winning hockey games. And then in the top 3 in the Atlantic, and I had a really tough time ranking these 1 through 3. I think honestly, these 3 teams will be within 3 points of each other at the end of the year. I think they all have their flaws. I think they all have their really strong strengths. For me, number 3, I have Florida. I think similar to some of the other teams that I've mentioned, like I'm pretty nervous if they have an injury on the back end, like what's going to happen to that team. You don't have Stolars to potentially come in and take over for Bobrovsky if he has a couple of shaky games during the regular season, which as great as he's been in the playoffs, he's had some shaky regular seasons in the past few years. And I think some of the depth in their bottom 6 is a little scary relative to the other 2 teams that we'll mention here. For number 2, I've got Boston, and I went back and forth on this for a while. I love the Bruins roster this year, and I think the big question mark of Jeremy Swayman is, quite frankly, the only reason that I don't have them winning the Atlantic. I think if Jeremy Swayman was signed, this would be a done deal, no-brainer, win the Atlantic team. But for me, if he doesn't play the first 2 months, I find it tough for them to be as competitive. Did you get it? You've been looking at it. At it. I just see his. I don't know if anyone's on YouTube. You can just see Ditzel's eyeballs rolling around his little paws in there.
This thing is no joke, like the size of my hand. That might be. I just took like 6 legs off it, so now it's. Hang on, I gotta.
Oh my lord!
Sorry.
No, this is good. I felt like I was like one of those newscasters who's got like so much crap going on in the background. They just got to like stay like on task while Dittel's like throwing his hands around in the background. But no, long story short, with Boston, if Jeremy Swayman plays the whole season, they win the Atlantic in my opinion. But I don't think he's going to. Therefore, I have them at number 2, which leads me to my number 1 of Toronto winning the division. I think. They got better on the D-core. I think they solidified some of their goaltending questions. I think Craig Berube is going to come in and really play them in a system that's going to allow not only their top 6, but some of their complementary pieces, whether you look at Matthew Knies or Bobby McMann, to really thrive in that offense. So for me, I've got them winning the Atlantic this year.
My first team in, wild card 2, the Ottawa Senators. Hey, the first bet I will make on the Fifth Liners podcast here. I I'm driving up for the opening night here to watch them just trounce the Stanley Cup champs, whether there's 6 players on the bench at the end of the game or not. It might be ugly. It's going to be awesome. If the Sens make when the Sens make the playoffs, you're driving up to Potsdam, New York, and I'll buy the tickets. We're driving an hour and 15 minutes north to go watch the Sens take on whoever the heck the 1 seed is and their first playoff appearance in 8 or 9 years.
I'm there. I'm watching. It'll be Sens Red Wings Game 7 in Ottawa. It'll be an unbelievable opportunity to go and see who really was the smartest kid on the podcast here.
Mark the calendar. I'm writing the email to your boss right now. Matt needs off April 12th or 13th or 14th or whatever it's going to be, but you're missing work that day. Number 2 for me, it's Tampa Bay. I'm right with you, but man, it's this would be the team I would take out if I put Montreal or Detroit or one of those teams in. It's just too hard to take. I still think the leadership core on that team's got at least one more kick at it. And Montreal's in next year. Maybe it's Tampa out. I got them as my wild card too. Florida, I think there's going to be an extreme cup hangover. I think they're going to come out of the gates real slow this year. I still have them third in the division. I think there's a pretty big gap between similar to the Metro, the top 3, but really the top 2. And you talked about Boston and Toronto. Man, it's scary to think about Swayman being out. I still think Korpisalo is going to be able to thrive, and as long as he stays healthy or Swayman gets done early, one of the two, that's the reason I have Toronto as number 2 in the conference. But it kills me to be high on the Maple Leafs this year. I think that is an unbelievable team. I think they're going to be threatening all year. I could see them being a President's Trophy winner. It's going to be a great team, but I think they're going to come in second. I've got the Boston Bruins winning the Atlantic Division. Time for the Parlay Party. And Spotify's got premium. Amazon's got Prime. Netflix has, I don't even know what Netflix is called. ESPN's got Plus. We got the Parlay Party Premium, baby. Betting segment here. 5 picks a piece. Should we just ring them off one at a time? I go, you go, I go.
Yeah, give us your first hot one, Ditzel.
I'm kicking it off with the Boston Bruins, and as I've been watching NFL games, I've decided that the under is just the most awful thing ever because it is no fun rooting for people not to score. But my first one is an under. Brad Marchand's line is at 68.5 total points. He's hit this line every year in the past 6. The injury concerns are the reason that I think he will be under that number. It's unclear whether he's going to come back. He said maybe opening night, maybe in that first week. I still think there's going to be a feeling out period. It might be a little bit slow for Marchand in the first 10 games or so. I think it's going to be a close number. I really like that line, but I've got him coming in maybe 65, 66, 67 points, just under 68.5.
Yeah, and if he plays 70 games, I think he gets pretty close to that number. Obviously, the injury concerns are there, but for me, I believe in Brad Marchand. Time in and time out, he proves that he is an absolute battler. Like, he played with 2 or 3 injuries all of last year and still hit that point over. So I can see the concerns for it, but for me personally, I mean, I'm never going to bet against Marchand.
I will also say that's not one I'm going to be putting any of my personal money on because Brad Marchand, I think, is my favorite player in the NHL. Hate him. I love him. But that guy is an absolute dog. Similar to why I love Brady Tkachuk. Just ruthless guys to play against.
Indeed. And I will stick on my only under as well. I will have all the bad news out here first. I talked about him before and some of his defensive game kind of lacking in the past couple of years and in terms of the underlying numbers. But you look at Victor Hedman, I know he's going to take a bigger role on the team, both with the departure of Mikhail Sergachev as well as the captaincy. but his point total at 64.5 just seems super high for a defenseman, especially one that's been a little injury prone over the last couple of seasons. So for me, I think putting a number that high for a D-man who, has been declining slightly the past few years, I have a hard time seeing him getting to that number personally. So for me, I've got the under at 64.5 there for Victor Hedman's total points.
I'm going to go back on the overs here. And for me this time, it's with the Buffalo Sabres, even though I think they're going to be a tough team to watch this year. I think a lot of that comes defensively. This is an offense that has a lot of young talent, as we talked about. I think it's the defense that's the problem, especially in the goaltending. Looking at last year, where there's games they let in 4, 5, 6, no problem. It's still an offense that's going to put up 3 goals a game at least. And for that reason, I have Alex Tuch on the top line, top power play, his total points line at 65.5. I think he will clear that easily into the 70 mark. Last year was a huge struggle for the Buffalo Sabres. Tuch had Thompson missing for a lot of the year. The Sabres offense couldn't get anything going. He had 59 points last year. I think it's easy for him to get 6 more than that. And looking at the last year before that, when the Sabres offense was really cooking, they made that playoff push. If Tage Thompson's back to health here and he can start firing him in, I think JJ Peterka is going to be an outstanding player to boom for the Sabres this year that could help with this. He had 79 points 2 years ago. I think he'll be right around that 70 mark. I got the Tuch over.
Gotcha. And we're talking about guys who just consistently played pretty solid and have been with their team for a while. This is where we're going to have a lot of Detroit Red Wing bias here, in my opinion. But we're going to start off with Dylan Larkin, a guy who's been at or above a point per game each of the last 3 seasons. And now you've got a guy in Lucas Raymond who absolutely breaks out on his wing last year. You've got Alex DeBrincat, who is a proven 30 to 40 goal scorer year in and year out. That line drives and starts through Dylan Larkin, and his point total at 74.5. If he plays 82 games, I find it hard to believe he's not going to be at the same scoring clip, if not better than what he was last year, which should put him over with flying colors. So for me, we're going to start off the Detroit Red Wing love here with our Dylan Larkin point over at 74.5.
I just pumped his tires real hard. My next one is JJ Peterka. He was just about a point per game player 3 years ago in the AHL in Rochester, 68 points in 70 games. As a rookie in the NHL, he put up 32 points with the Sabres. Last year, he saw more time on the offense, getting some power play looks, had 50 total points last year, 28 coming on goals. And his line is not much above that, similar to Tuch. Peterka at 53.5 points is going to be my absolute lock this parlay party here. There is no question in my mind that he gets 4 more points than last year. The only way that wouldn't happen would be with an injury, but I got Peterka as maybe a 65, 70 point guy this year for the Sabres.
I love it, but you're loving the Buffalo top line. I'm loving the Detroit top line. You look at Alex DeBrincat. I mentioned him earlier on that left side with Larkin and Raymond. Prior to coming to Detroit, 27 goals in Ottawa, 41 in Chicago, 32 in Chicago. Had a slight down season in 2019, but then another 41 goal season the season before that. He's 27 years old, kind of reaching his prime here, and his over-under at 29.5 is just a couple more than what he had last year. And with the emergence of Larkin the emergence of Raymond and the continued play of Dylan Larkin and that Detroit power play, which was top 10 in the league last year, I think continuing to make strides. I'm very high on DeBrincat to get over that 30 clip again in his career. And I think, 35 to 40 is kind of the number that I see him kind of hitting this year.
On to point marks for me. We talked about both of us liking, if not loving, the Toronto Maple Leafs this year. This is a 110, 112, 113, maybe 120 point team without question. Their line is just 102.5, another absolute lock for me. at -105. Throw the bank account down. The Leafs are going to crush that number this year on the over.
Yeah, and another team that you guys all know I love after listening to the last hour. I can't pump their tires enough. The Detroit Red Wings. Their point total I see is 90.5 at +100. We're getting plus money here for a 90.5 points in a season where
Vegas
they
knows, Maddie. Vegas knows, buddy.
if Vegas knew
You're
everything,
going to be a broke, disappointed man.
if Vegas knew everything, then they wouldn't be having a line at one side or the other, right? It would just be they're going to hit 92, aren't they? So for me, I think this Detroit team is just bound for a really solid season, and even if they're not a playoff team, clipping 91 points could put them at 5th or 6th in this tough Atlantic division and not be a playoff team. But I think with the league being super competitive, there's going to be a lot of points up for grab with overtime losses. And I think one of the teams that's going to benefit from that is Detroit. A lot of those games against, Tampa, Montreal, even Ottawa, Buffalo, Florida, like those are going to be tight games every single time. It's going to be a battle to get 2 points in the Atlantic. And I think at 90.5, that's a lower number than they hit last year, and a team that I think improved this offseason. I'm hammering it.
My division winner at +500, a risky pick. I will not throw this as a lock, but I love the Boston Bruins, and it all comes down to the goaltending question mark. I think, man, if it holds out till December 1, this might really change my decision on it. But if Swayman can come in by the American Thanksgiving mark, and Eunice Korpisalo can be a competent goaltender, I think Boston's got the division here. Boston at +500 is my division winner.
I do love the value there. I think they're a signed Jeremy Swayman away from being a very strong Stanley Cup contender, like you mentioned.
And if you don't like that one, I would go Toronto. I think either of those are interchangeable. Toronto's a little less. I think they were close to plus 250, 275 range.
Right. So I think getting the value of +500 for Boston is unbelievable there. To end off, Marco, I'm not going to say it again, but you know where I'm going with this. Lane Hutson's point total. Obviously, rookie defenseman, it's a little nerve-wracking to bet a point over. When you've got a guy who's going out here and making NHL caliber players look like literal traffic cones at 38.5 points on that top power play that made me salivate over here, Lane Hudson is going to smash that over. I think he could easily get 40 to 50 assists this year. Yes, he does have questions on his defensive game. I don't care about that when I'm betting the point over at 38.5 points. I think this is an absolute lock, almost more of a lock than the Paterka pick that Ditzel's in love with. I do love Paterka myself, but 38.5 points, I find it hard that, it could be February or March when you hit that number and, accelerating beyond it. He's one of my favorites, if not the favorite in the Calder race in a year that a Sharks fan has both Will Smith and Malcolm Celebrini on their team. So if that doesn't tell you how much I love Lane Hudson at this point, I'm completely sold on him.
That's the Parlay Party Premium. 5 of our favorite Atlantic Division picks. Talking about traffic cones, Maddie, the highlight that's about to hit Twitter after we hang up this call from my beer league game earlier today. An unbelievable forecheck, gets stick on puck between the guy's legs, breakaway 5-hole. Just absolute. I'm an athletic specimen today. I went out, I biked 45 miles at between 4 and 6:30, got a quick dinner and ripped it over, and then had an hour of beer league before my meeting for class. Huge presentation earlier today. Another presentation upcoming tomorrow. Academic weapon. Update on my laundry situation to the growing pile from last week. It's been cleaned. It's now folded on my floor. Hasn't quite made it to the drawers yet, but the kid's having a big week here.
Sounds like Megan made a visit up this weekend. Got the laundry done for you.
No, sir. No, sir. All by myself.
Yeah, she still deserves a lot of credit for the last 4 years before. But
No kidding.
yeah, no, I think if we had a fifth liners decathlon, you're starting to really put yourself in a situation to be one of the front runners here in terms of the Parlay Party. But can't say I have the most athletic day myself, being at the office and then having the company happy hour afterwards. But we just had to dial in on the train to get ready for the episode here, and it's about a mile and a half of walking between the office and my apartment. So make it 2 ways, and you get yourself a little 3 mile walk every day. So getting my steps in where I can, but obviously the 9 to 5 turn into more of like an 8 to 7 some days will limit myself from being the athletic specimen that we have on the other side of this call.
I'm pulling a Paul Bizinet. I am now 2 months sober since moving into school, which is going to come to a hard end. My best buddy's getting married this weekend. I'm one of the groomsmen, so I'm very excited for that one. But if we want to take a shot at Megan here, I am down 12 pounds in the last 3.5 weeks from the athletic specimenness of having a little more free time than before, now that she's grinding it out at school and I'm up here all by myself with absolutely nothing to do. I had to find something to keep the activities high. What do you got going up this week? Well,
Not
other
much. I'm
than the
actually,
Fifth Liners fantasy hockey draft. Whoa!
I know I'll actually be in the car on Sunday getting all my prep done. I will be driving down to Rochester, New York this weekend to play a few different golf courses. We got a fraternity tournament on Friday with my dad's old fraternity that I'm playing in, and then I'll be
What do you got
TBD
Sunday? You still there?
TBD courses Saturday and Sunday. So if you got to try and find around between, we're gonna.
I also happen to be in Rochester Sunday. If you would like to come out to the Midvale Country Club.
It sounds like we might be having a fifth liners golf outing Sunday morning here.
Hey, not too bad. All right. Well, how about this? We made it through the episode, and not only do we not have to hire divorce attorneys, we now have 2 dates that we've somehow set up. We've got the upcoming Ottawa playoff game, and now a little golf match to go look forward to here. Maddie,
I think Don Sweeney's going to be furious that the podcasters are uniting here. I think if we got through episode 11, I think 113 might be easier to hit than number 13 here. So we're only going up from here. We got through the Ottawa and Detroit conversations without absolutely bashing our brains into each other. So can't really complain about that too much.
the division previews are done. So is the month of September. Hockey is coming up October 4th. The puck drop, non in the contiguous United States or North America. The official puck drop set for September 8th for the rest of the league, but it's coming quick. Next week, our fantasy hockey episode for those who indulge, as we are very excited to. I've been just grinding the research. The spreadsheet's growing. Matt has been snoozing. Doesn't have a clue whose picks and values he's going to be going with. So I'm looking forward to dominating that one this week. And next week, we will talk about it. This has been another episode of the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast. Make sure to like and subscribe. Follow us on YouTube or Spotify for the full episodes. If you want the quick snippets, check us out on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok. Instagram and TikTok at Fifth Liners Pod, and on Twitter at Fifth Line Pod. We finally got one up and running without being banned. Big thank you to Jimmy Murphy for taking the time and his analysis of the Atlantic. Thanks as always to Matt Leonardo right here for sticking with me and throwing out some terribly thought through takes. Maybe it was mine that were terribly thought through. A huge thank you to our producer who's gotten a couple of shouts here, Marco Hidalgo, hard at work out on the West Coast. This podcast is not possible without the work he does to bring this show to you. Until next week, fantasy hockey coming up, previews down, Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast, episode 11 in the books. Stay tuned. We'll see you next time.